Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. This is Alex from Apocalypse.Intelligence. Many of you might know me as Ren, Marco, Raven, or Marcosius. Anyway, so, quick recap. I was born intersex. I got a very slight purple line that goes all the way up my crotch, which is super sensitive, which is why I have never been into casual sex. Thought everybody had that point of sensitivity. They don't. I'm dealing with that the best I can. Okay? I was trafficked from Germany when I was 2 years old. Sold to a family that was incredibly rich and embedded in academia, the Huntsberger family. Bill Huntsberger worked for UPenn and Community College of Philadelphia as an administrator for several decades. So that's a great big scandal there. My heritage, my ancestry, I'm not going to get into that in this video, but that's also controversial. However, most Persians can identify what lineage I come from just by looking at me. And that's actually, well, it depends on the age of the Persian. If they're older than 50, then yes. Younger, maybe not so much. So, next thing, Moravian College. I get separated from the only family that I had ever met, the only Persian family I ever met, and there is no way, nor was it their right, to have disclosure as to who my actual parentage is, and why it was none of their business how close and I, Dr. Naraki, got, even though we have had no sexual contact, and I know several faculty that did, with their students. And I am not going to out them, because the way that I see it is that is adult arrangements between two consenting adults. Not my problem. However, the contradiction of me sitting in his office and reading books and, having a best friend, having a peer, learning Sufism, learning Farsi from Faramars, was suddenly seen as the greatest crime that I could ever commit. That I was a Rachel Dolezal, that I was signing myself for my own subjugation by reverting to Islam, when what it felt to me was a homecoming, when I had been raised in a household of my dead father. Well, he wasn't dead at the time, he faked his death in 1979, with all this Persian motif all over the house. And that's painful. And that's cruel. And then after that, getting monitored for years and years and years by the college, by faculty that I never had classes with, who used me as some sort of cautionary tale, my trauma, my pain after I was tortured by Northampton police for reverting to Islam. When my physics paper was stolen and misaligned and maligned, when my work has been maligned. That's enough. My intelligence partner in 2011 was murdered by a cult. That's another point of contention. We have a lot of issues that we're working on, and if you see me change registers, that's why. So, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, Khoda Hafez. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. This is Alex from Apocalypse.Intelligence. Again, some of you might know me as Ren, Marcosius, Marco, any of these other names that I've had to use throughout the course of my life, because I have been maligned since I was trafficked here when I was 2 years old into a indentured servitude situation with the Huntsberger Mesnura family. Again, so we're going to recap the major issues here in a summary so you can understand what's going on with my pages. I do not play to the gallery. I'm only playing to potential allies, existing friends, supervisors, and loved ones. So with that being said, we're going to continue. So I was born November 29th, 1981, somewhere in Germany. I was put into a Jesuit home with my brother, allegedly. I don't know. I would have to talk to my brother more directly than mirroring him on Instagram and, sending music back and forth to find out the details of his childhood. But he does remember me, so that's good. He remembers me a lot. We were raised by somebody named Brother Dominic, allegedly, and I was stolen and paid for by Americans and transported via Latvia, allegedly, to the United States to replace a child by the name of Lauren Amanda Huntsberger who had Down syndrome. If you look at my page, you'll be able to see the picture of the two babies back and forth. You can very clearly see which baby I am. The one that has the firm jawline and obviously doesn't have Down syndrome. When I was in elementary school, on my files it said that I had Down syndrome. Very clearly I don't have that. I was put into learning support classes that I didn't need until 4th grade when I was transferred into the gifted program. For those who say that I was, this horrible, unruly child in my childhood, I wasn't. Anything would make me cry because I was violently abused at home, beaten every day, yelled at, and forced to do domestic labor that nobody ever showed me how to do, and I was screamed at whenever I did it wrong, in a hoarder house full of sewing needles, knitting needles everywhere sticking out of furniture. It was absolutely disgusting. The conditions were disgusting. I wasn't even allowed to eat. And, I couldn't chew too loudly. I couldn't walk too loudly. I couldn't talk too loudly. If I talked back, I'd get slapped across the face. That is why I left when I was 17. So, in elementary school, if you want to talk to people who can verify what was happening at home, if Dr. Miskowskis, principal of Oakmont Elementary, is still alive, she's a great person. Thomasine Mathis, the art teacher of Oakmont Elementary School, and possibly Carol Taylor. However, Carol Taylor is obviously, well, not obviously, but she seems to be compromised by the entire Huntsberger agenda, because the Huntsbergers are very powerful in academia, as William T. Huntsberger used to be the vice president of Community College of Philadelphia for several decades, and on the board of University of Pennsylvania. So it was embarrassing to them to have a child with Down syndrome. Now, Vespa Mesnora, my primary abuser, the reason why she abused me is because she knew that her child was stolen. So she didn't have any sort of maternal connection to me. She really just saw me as an object, as a slave, whatever, as escaped property when I left when I was 17. And frankly, that sucks. I am intersex. I did not realize that having a very, very hypersensitive, very slight purple line going down the middle of your crotch is not normal. It's very subtle. You can't really see it unless you're looking for it. I kind of thought it was like when I was a kid, like how goldfish had that line across their bodies, and I just kind of thought everybody was like that. So TMI, that's a big reason why I never do casual sex. I can't have any intimacy with somebody that I don't trust and love, because I wasn't even aware that I have sensitivities to parts of my body that most normal people do not experience. That sucks. So that was done within 24 hours of birth. I'm not angry at Germany for it, because that was the practice at the time. What I am angry for is that it was kept from me. That's no good. On top of that all, one of the other reasons I was shipped out of Germany is allegedly our parents, mine and my brother's. So one parent is Valdis Mesnora, who, I was raised to think was my grandfather. He's actually my father, biologically speaking. And my mother is I'll just say that she's Persian and well-known, and she passed away in 2001, unfortunately. May Allah grant her Jannah. So, next issue. So, we go all the way from my teens into that. Then we get into my intelligence career, which started with the AmeriCorps, where I was basically taught to survive off of nothing and audit systems as a matter of course. Anybody who's in AmeriCorps Vista is trained to go through the poverty system and find the errors in it that do not serve the people, that work against the lower classes. I don't mean lower classes as in they're lower, but I mean the working classes, the people who are disabled, that sort of thing. A lot of these systems are designed to create further disenfranchisement and less services, with the appearances of giving more, because of the hoops and the amount of humiliation that the individual has to go through to even get the services in the first place. So many of us in Vista never stopped being Vistas, even though, the program ended, we did our 1 to 2 year service. That mindset, that methodology continued throughout our adult lives, and then was exploited through, our services being basically taken for free. It's like, oh, wow, And I will say that the only money I ever got for those services, other than my stipend in the AmeriCorps, which was poverty level, was perhaps when I was reporting my old travel agency that I used to work for to OSHA repeatedly, after they unlawfully canned their entire night shift, saying that we weren't, fulfilling up to performance. Well, they also liked putting people's entire information in filing cabinets, including birthdays and social security numbers, full address, and credit card details, in open filing cabinets that were accessible, with behind no locked doors. You could just walk into the office and there they were. And time clock mismanagement and that sort of thing. So, okay, I know this is boring. Then we get to Moravian. Okay? Moravian College is the first time in my entire life I met another Persian, much less 2, 3, 4, 5. I was identified within a week. Okay? I have very characteristic features for people who have been familiar with the Pahlavi dynasty. we're just going to leave it at that. My peer, Arash Naraki, he discovered me first week. I had, I agreed to buy it with him. I have studied world religions my entire life because I had to make sense about the abuse of my childhood. So by the fact that I was isolated, I was grounded all the time, I had nothing around me except for books and music, I ended up turning to God or trying to make sense out of, why does everybody hate me? Why doesn't anything make sense? Why do I make everybody uncomfortable just by being myself without even knowing that I was born basically a boy? But, in elementary school, I went through lots of therapy, on how to be a girl, and I hated every second of it. I would cry every time they put me in a dress. I felt humiliated. And that's something that no man would ever want to go through. So if you're a man and watching this, imagine how you would feel if your dick was lopped off within 48 hours of birth and they tried to make you a girl for your entire life and then punished you for your natural masculine behavior, your assertiveness, your interest, your athletic prowess, your ability to think in a male way versus a female way, and then being censored and audited and pathologized for something that isn't a pathology. Intersex is actually much more common than we see in the United States because they actually audit babies all over the world at birth, deciding what constitutes a man, whose genitals are accepted as manly, and then everything else is in their minds demoted to female. And that says a whole heck of a lot more about how negatively they view females and how much of a protected class male is, because male isn't even fully real. Because gender, unfortunately, biologically speaking, not ideologically speaking, is a spectrum, and I got the scar to prove it. I've had that my entire life, and I'm not going to take pictures of it unless somebody comes up here and says, it's hard to maneuver my camera, and I've already humiliated myself with that, okay? Just by exposing all of this. This is very difficult. This is not easy to tell you the most humiliating aspects of my life. To be told to tell you that I was raised by people who don't love me, who don't see any good in me whatsoever, and they literally see me as, they will say anything they can to discredit me. Same thing with college. Because of my closeness with Dr. Naraki, that was seen as an inappropriate relationship. Yet I knew of teachers that would flat out sleeping with professors. No, I'm not going to out them. That's their agreement between two consenting adults, as all adult relationships should be. However, there has been no physical intimacy between myself and my, I don't know how close he is, biological relative. Look at us. Arash. Good job, guys. You separated a family. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh again. This is Alex from Apocalypse.Intelligence, and, well, or you might know me as Ren, Renee, Marco, Raven, blah, 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 whatever other names you've given me. We're going to go into the next part of the summary as to what this page is about. Basically, I have been working as a investigator, unpaid, a chaplain, unpaid, an AI auditor, unpaid, a resource, a inspiration, a blah, 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 as well as being pathologized, treated like I am insane, treated completely isolated, my friends removed from me by bad actors who spread lies and rumors about my mental clarity, my drug and alcohol status, which is 0 except for cannabis, and any other thing that they could come up with, including spoofing me, spoofing my loved ones, spoofing my professors, to keep me isolated and to keep them isolated, and also to cover up for a very big murder that affected everybody's lives in my social group and community back in 2011. So we're going to get into the religious aspect. So the house that I was raised in went two different directions. So they pretended to be German Lutheran, but then at home they were lighting black candles and doing all sorts of, not even pagan, but 7 books of Moses, hexerai sort of things. That's something you have to go to Rob Schweier about to explain. I'm not getting into that in this video, but let's just say it's not a healthy way or mindset of viewing the world. It's very retaliatory. When you go home and, foster mom, who beats me every day, is upset because somebody cut her off in traffic. It's not normal to put pins in black candles, put them in front of mirrors, and curse them. That's not a very Lutheran thing to do. So that led me in high school, college, my 20s, seeking every sort of answer through mysticism and religion that I could possibly find. And that's what brought me to the heathen community. I was raised Pennsylvania Dutch. I could speak some German, although the German that I spoke didn't seem to match the Pennsylvania Dutch German, because I didn't know that I was adopted, and I didn't know that my first 2 years of life were spent in a bilingual French and German area. I do know that much, allegedly. I can understand French if it's written out. I can't speak it back. So in the heathen community, there was several iterations of togetherness, such as Der Stamm, Disselfink, Volkvanger, Kindred, Wolves of Vinland, and Dan Reigel was in all of them. He was the bridge. He was the peacekeeper. He was basically the Forsetti between every single heathen, pagan, whatever, intelligence group, watcher, whatever, that existed, that cared for their sections of the community, whether it was in the Poconos, in Bristol, in Amish County, in Reading, in Bethlehem. Dan would go everywhere. He watched everything. He saw himself as like an Einwicker Jäger or a Holla character, Holler, which is male Hella. He was murdered violently by a cult. It was framed and staged as if he committed suicide in the most embarrassing way possible. And then ever since his murder in October of 2011, every single person involved with him has reached the same or similar disenfranchisement, separation from loved ones, being defamed, relationships split apart, kindreds being destroyed, people being, it was a great big mess, because there's some people out there that literally believe in these cultic communities, and not asatru, not heathenry, but in the ones that pretend to be things that they're not. And then they get into the whole satanic, quote unquote, BS, where they think that by sacrificing other people's friendships, by making them miserable, it gives them energy and power. That's not real. That's not true. That's psychosis. What you're actually doing is abusing people. What you're actually doing is international crimes, covering up a murder, stalking, isolating people, giving them bad information, drugging them, harming them. I've been poisoned a couple of times. I went into a former video, one for quote unquote being a race traitor when I started studying Persian, but yet Persians are Aryans. So that tells you exactly the quality of some of these communities that we were dealing with. I was poisoned in a situation with my first ex-husband, Edward Anderson Jr., who worked at East Penn Manufacturing and brought his work home with him. Lead paste, lead dust, lead everything, all over his clothing. There are medical records confirming how many times I went to the doctors with him about his own lead poisoning, not realizing that I was obtaining my own. So by the time it was realized that I had lead poisoning, plus other heavy metals, antimony and mercury, I basically had committed myself to die. I didn't really care, because my life was miserable anyway. I was with a man I didn't love. I was sleeping in my office. I didn't think anybody else cared about me in the entire world, because the cult that killed Dan had literally separated me from everybody, including my ex-husband, who was in that cult as well, including my mentor through intelligence, who taught me everything he could in the field. And his name is Robert L. Schweier, who I met at the funeral of Dan Regal, the guy that I was training with, and the guy that Rob himself was mentoring directly. Dan and I would meet in the library at Moravian College twice a week, and, sometimes he'd scoop me up and take me back to the heathen stuff, just for contrast, because Moravian was toxic. There are so many of us in the honors program that were driven with so much pressure upon us into psychological situations, into breakdown and collapse, as they just recorded us like we were a study and didn't intervene. I've seen classmates crying in the cafeteria, and then later hearing, a particular professor, thinking that it was funny. And that professor's still there. That's the same professor that said I was disenfranchising myself and setting myself up for my own subjugation by reverting to Islam. And I do mean reversion, because obviously if I come from 2 Muslim parents, even if I was IVF, the attempt at erasing my culture has continued throughout the course of my life. I've had my closest loved ones have been reduced to having to contact me under alias because the people at Moravian College made it that way. They didn't focus on any other students, they focused on me. They wanted to make an example out of me, that I was crazy, that I was unhinged because I could see clearly, and because I refused to take classes with anybody who I felt was unethical. And somebody took that personally. No, no one should be teaching a class on a religion that they have been defrocked from. And I'm going to state that very clearly, and I'm not going to state names. No one should be claiming chaplaincy when they do not have a religion that supports them and backs them. You can't be an atheist chaplain. That doesn't make any sense. Make it make sense. Actually, don't make it make sense. Just get out of my field. With the death of Dan Reigel, that has become an international issue because he was working with multiple agencies, including with my brothers in Deutschland, which may be actually why, after he came back from Germany, why he took a special interest in me, because my own brother has been trying to deal with the loss of me, which he has more conscious awareness of, being about, a decade older than me, than I ever did. Further, the next issue that we've had to contend with, other than the mess of Dan Reigel's death and the lack of pay for intelligence rights, is the mistreatment of professors and Shaykh in academia and religious institutions. Because I did not have a legitimate family that actually loved me growing up, I bonded very closely with teachers. And they became my loved ones, and some of them turned out to actually be relatives, which is really cool. Now then, when I was separated, this doesn't just happen to me. They were also separated and isolated. And when anybody's separated and isolated, they are primed for extortion. So my Murshid, my Shaykh, Dr. Timothy Winter in Cambridge, he contacted me a couple of months ago, and he indicated, I noticed on his videos that he was looking further and further unwell. I was able to tie him to the last poisonings in Pennsylvania, because when I thought I was dying of lead poisoning, and I saw Mr. Schweier doing his weekly video on Ergalava, and he was talking about neuropathy, and the exact same symptoms that I had, tunnel vision, neuropathy, and that sort of thing, I screamed, and I'm just like, Rob, you're poisoned. That's not long COVID. I called him on the phone. We ended up debriefing in person. He told me that he was blackmailed. He told me that Dan wasn't a suicide, but we already knew that. I learned that from Brian Bean several years before that. So many people have been hurt. Dan Norris was drugged, disenfranchised, and COINTELPRO'd. Our local folk singer through Norsewind, who was in the same band as Dan. Ford and Chelsea, very strong pagan leader couple, were split apart. Their Stamm was dissolved over a lie that Rebecca Radcliffe owed $100 to Lewin Worrell. We had Jessica Beta Widener, attacking my reputation, saying that I was basically Frankenstein and covered in scars when I'm not. And also, how would she have that information about how many surgeries I've had, and why would that be any of her business? Doesn't make any sense. Make it make sense. People who were jealous and didn't understand, myself and others, have created a living hell for us since 2011, and only now are we starting to pull ourselves out of it. I'm creating these videos and doing these reports, not for myself alone, but for everybody else who was affected. And I am trying my best to restore not just my dignity, but the dignity of my professors, my loved ones, and every other survivor of being disenfranchised by a college, by a religious institution, by gangs, by cults, or by individuals who sought to harm you, where there is no justice so far, because all the bad guys gather up in groups. Well, we can gather up in groups too. We can talk to each other. We can share stories and actually go online and talk about what happened to us, what happened back then. You can talk about what lies that you heard about, your friends to separate you, the ones that had no business being said, and how the reality and the lies are not the same. And I'm not the only person who was a victim of this, or rather a survivor. I've watched my peer get poisoned. I've watched my Murshid, go through the hospital where I was the only person allegedly caring for him day after day, only to be told that I was his mistress, which I'm not, that, accused of impropriety, when the true impropriety is that if somebody is truly the face of a college, then why wasn't anybody in his hospital room holding his hand? Why do you discredit me when I'm the murid that actually cared? Next issue is the fact that I work from a Eastern eschatology, and the Moravian model, which has unlawfully surveilled me, has framed my religious experiences and practices and those of all Sufis and Muslims as pathology. Illegal, unlawful, and cruel. And that needs to stop. Absolutely. No more toleration of that. Many of my loved ones are stuck communicating under alias because of intelligence non-disclosures. Not allowing people, because they're in intelligence, to talk to their loved ones directly. Apparently Almaz Nora had somebody who was very close to him in the music industry, who was in a band in the 1990s that was rather well known, who was watching, and he was not able to say goodbye to Al, even though they were once friends, when he was working at the Core State Center. That's cruel. That was cruel to Alvy, and the guy's name was Jonathan, and that was incredibly cruel to Jonathan. So basically watching a former friend die and your non-disclosure is not allowing you to say goodbye directly is horrific and inexcusable. How many people are in the intelligence industry called as quote-unquote assets, pathologized, put between handlers, which are basically human traffickers, their intelligence, their talents, their expertise exploited, and then completely defamed, decredited, called crazy, while other people are profiting off of our work, off of our intelligence, off of our creations that other people are literally claiming as their own. And I'm far from the only one from that as well. The last thing that I'm working on is de-radicalization. In Islam, over the past 30 years, there's been a movement called neo-traditionalism. It's not real. A lot of the hadith are faked. The great divisions between men and women, that's also what this movement was created to do, was destroy Islam from within, and it's doing so. Some of the leaders of this movement, quote-unquote leaders, are actually trapped officers, covert officers. Some of them are Muslim, some of them aren't, who are stuck in roles, who are forced to be celebrity shuyuk, which is isolating, where people see them as a saint or bodhisattva, but Islamic style. And in Islam, that's actually shirk. The Shaykh, the Murshid, the Mufti, whatever, is supposed to stand behind the student, support them, give them backbone, and the ability to think for themselves, to create an adult, not other followers, not other slaves. We're never supposed to put anybody between us, ourselves, and Allah. We're not supposed to rely on our teachers to interpret the faith for us. We're not Catholicism. However, our religion has followed that Catholic model, whereas opposed to sitting with your teacher, eating with them, and living in a family situation, in a community, the teacher is now basically another priest at a pulpit. No different than Christianity, separate from the laity, and creating a priest caste versus a rest of us caste. And that's not Islam. That's corruption. There are probably other projects that I'm working on as well, but those are the primary ones that you're going to be seeing on my pages. I'm going to be defending my colleagues. I'm going to be defending other students. I'm going to be deconstructing radical Islam, as I've already been. I'm going to be defending my teachers and working on repairing my relationships with them. And I'm going to be seeking reparations and justice for the harms that we've experienced through Moravian College, through Cambridge Muslim College, through every other group that has unlawfully profited and disenfranchised us to their benefit and our detriment. And with that being said, Assalamu alaikum, Khoda Hafez, and Auf Wiedersehen. May Allah grant us justice and wisdom on this path, and may He grant all of us afiyah in the direction that we need to make a better world than the hell that we have been living in for these years. May those who wish to be free be freed. May everybody have better working conditions. And may the wrongdoers, those that have taken joy and pleasure and benefited from harming polymaths, neurodivergent students, geniuses, the artistic, the autistic, the neurodiverse, if I haven't mentioned them already, as well as anybody else that they may have been jealous of or could have, profited from unlawfully. I am seeking settlements for us all. But what I need from you is I need you to speak up. If you've been harmed, you're safe in speaking up. They're not going to go after you. I promise. Take care now. God bless you. Is about how to contact me in the least awkward way possible for both of us. Okay? So first of all, I'm not mad at anybody except for people who have taken joy and pleasure at the pain and suffering inflicted upon others. Those people are unforgivable to me. I don't want to, yeah. Everybody else, people who are misled, people who are afraid, people who have witnessed these things and have been harmed in the various communities. And that includes, I forgot in the last video, Discordianism, the Discordian murders. Yes, we are going to be looking into the Discordian murders as well. The murder of my friend Jesse Remley, who worked in Washington, D.C. He's the one who guarded me when I was getting my nose job done. Of Mark Dumashat, Nook Finn, apparently there were ways to save her, according to Europe, that could have been employed in the United States. She was not given adequate medical care. There is a pattern of disenfranchisement and difficulties in disco as well. We've lost a lot of people recently in disco to gang stalking and mobbing. So, how to get in touch with me? If you're a member of the heathen community, if you're a member of Moravian College, blah, 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 blah. Okay. First of all, for Cambridge Muslim College, only Timothy Winter. I don't know any of the rest of you. I don't want to hear from any of the rest of you. I will only speak to Tim. That is my Murshid. That is my Shaykh. The way that I've seen you treat him, reprehensible and abhorrent. There's nothing that you can say to me without him present that I'm going to listen to. Secondly, Moravian College. Moravian College, the people who have used me as a false example over the years, specifically who has harmed me, and it has not been Arash. It has not been Faramars. I'm asking you, Jason Radine, to finally view me as a colleague, because by you not befriending students after they've graduated and not seeing the reality that they've lived versus the propaganda that's been spewed about them, versus not being able to make inquiries about, hey, when somebody's poisoned, yeah, they're going to act a little goofy. But when they're removed from the poisoning, sanity returns. Clarity returns. But that doesn't remove the crime. It doesn't remove the greater crime of other people taking advantage of those points of compromise, weakness, and, well, flat out being tortured to paint an unjust and completely irrational picture that is unfair to myself and others. So, if you're at Moravian College, if you're a student, if you're a faculty member, and you want to speak to me, the best way to do so is you can contact me through Instagram, you can contact me through Facebook, you can contact one of my existing contacts and get the phone number off of me. I do not do email. It skips right over my mind. I'm on Telegram, I can be on Snapchat. I can get on whatever medium you're comfortable with. My most comfortable medium is phone, but I know nobody else uses phones right now. If you're in the heathen community, any of you, there is no limitation. We know who the bad people are. And I know the heathen community from back in 2010 pretty much better than anybody except for Rebecca Radcliffe and Rob Schweier or Chris Loscar. So I know who's good. I know who's bad. I know what's up. Hey, Michael Beam, let's talk. Come on. So with that being said, in conclusion, may we all find ways to reunite and rebuild our communities. May we all find ways to heal from what's been done to us, reputationally, financially, socially, spiritually. May we all find justice. May we find true friends that truly love us, that we can love in return, in mutually non-toxic, reciprocal ways. May those who are trapped be freed. May those that deceive us find other targets until they're scooped up and taken out of the field entirely. May everybody who's hurting feel hope. And for the rest of you, may you feel courage. I state again, the best thing that you can do for this cause is have the courage to speak up. If you're a fellow survivor, start a page. Tell your story. Explain to others what happened to you, especially if you're in the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York area. If you're one of the people who suffered poisoning back in 2020, 2021, if you're a part of that group of community leaders, writers, and authors. If you lost your religious community, if your teachers are getting abused, if you've been separated from your mentors, or your relationship's pathologized because you're a religion that isn't white bread Christianity or fashionable atheism. I can't talk. Fashionable atheism. I don't edit my videos much. I cut them at the beginning and end, and whatever mistakes I make, I'm human. I'm not going to polish myself for you. And no, I don't want you to polish yourselves for your testimonies. The more of us that speak up, the more of us that gather together, the faster and better the results are going to be. So if you've witnessed this disenfranchisement personally, and you love Timothy Winter in CMC in London, take care of him. Defend him. Don't let them overwork him. That's the only way anybody in London is going to get my respect who's in the Muslim sphere. I've been working with London SIGINT for years. You know, all my radio buddies here, fine, of course. But don't make me have to send in like weird radio people to check in on our Shaykh. You know, they don't dress Muslim like you guys do. They got tattoos. They might wear leather. You know, they might have, you know, videos online that are not Muslim because they're not Muslims. They're just somebody who cares for their teacher. So, I conclude this video series, which is probably very poorly edited, with my closing again. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Khoda hafez and auf Wiedersehen. May Allah guide us to even greater truths, and if whatever I said in these videos has any inaccuracy, then I seek to be corrected. My memory, although very, very, very good in long term, is not very good in short term. And remember, I've survived poisoning. I've survived lead poisoning. I've had a stroke as well. Okay? Memory is fallible. Do not insult other survivors. Lift each other up. And I think that within the near future, we should be seeing an improvement of conditions. Inshallah. Ameen.